Hello. Today I'm going to talk about my top 10 cosmic horror films. I recently did a video on my top 10 occult folk horror films, so this is kind of a companion video to that. Uh, so, if you want to like or subscribe or hit the bell if you like what you see here, you can do that. Um, First, I should say, there are a few things that I'm basing this on. Obviously, the first and most important thing is H.P. Lovecraft and his stories. He is kind of the godfather of cosmic horror, I guess. Not all of these stories have all of these elements, but I feel like they have to have many of these in order to be cosmic horror. So the first thing is it has to somehow be otherworldly. Now that can be either like an alien kind of thing or a hyperdimensional kind of thing, but it has to have some kind of otherworldly element. There also has to be kind of a descent into madness or existential despair. Another component would be like the breaking of reality or another reality kind of imposing itself on our reality. Those conditions make for the best cosmic horror. So without further ado, I'm going to mention a few runners up first. The first one is a film that really stuck with me. It's called Messiah of Evil. And the only reason it's not on the list is because it's a little bit slow. And especially by today's standards, it's quite dull. It's from 1973. But aside from it being a bit dull, I think a lot of the ideas are quite good, and I do think they fit into the cosmic horror template. It's kind of a zombie film, but it also has this mystery going on that you're not quite sure what's happening. There are some scenes that are a bit corny. I actually think maybe if they did a remake, it could be quite good if they took the good elements and rejected the kind of boring ones. Another film that is not boring, but it doesn't quite make it on the list is The Blob with Steve McQueen from 1958. I love this movie. In fact, I think it's one of the first sort of horror movies I ever saw when I was a kid. And the reason I didn't put it on the list is because there are other movies on here that do a similar thing, but I think they do it a bit scarier and stronger. Now, that's not to say this isn't a classic or not an excellent movie. It is. But there are other ones on here I think that just fit this list better. You could say that's more of a monster movie. And the final one is The Dunwich Horror, which has Dean Stockwell and Sandra Dee in it, and that's from 1970. And this is an actual H.P. Lovecraft story, but again, it's a little bit dull in some spots, and it doesn't quite live up to the other films on this list, although I do think it's interesting, and it's a good representation of Lovecraft at that time, in the early 70s. So let's get on to the list. At number 10, we have Event Horizon, directed by Paul W.S. Anderson from 1997, starring Lawrence Fishburne, Sam Neill, and Kathleen Quinlan. A rescue crew investigates the mysterious reappearance of a spaceship, the Event Horizon, which disappeared into a black hole and has now returned, bringing with it a malevolent and supernatural force that begins to terrorize the crew, revealing the darkest fears of each member as they struggle to survive. Okay, so when I was a teenager, I worked at a movie theater, and it was kind of a down and out movie theater. I might do a video on it at some point, but it wasn't a very good theater. It was kind of like on its last legs. But across the street, there was a brand new theater. And they had Event Horizon. We did not. And I remember a lot of people getting a little bit angry at me for going over there to see it, but I really wanted to see it because at the time I was interested in kind of space movies, but also horror movies, and it kind of filled both wants. Now, what I wasn't bargaining for is how scary it actually was. It was quite scary, and there weren't that many people in the theater. If I recall, there were maybe 2 or 3 people in the theater, and maybe that made it scarier. I'm not sure, but um, it really, I guess, sometimes when you go into a movie, you kind of have an idea of what it's going to be, and it is something way beyond that. And I think that that's what happens in this movie. It really kind of pushes the envelope, especially once things get out of hand and the madness kind of sets in. It's very kind of nihilistic, but I think it is a good number 10 on this list. At number 9, we have The Beyond from 1981, which is directed by Lucio Fulci, and most of the stars you probably don't know, so I'm not going to mention them, but it's a young woman inherits an old hotel that is built on one of the 7 gateways to hell. As she attempts to renovate the property, she unwittingly unleashes supernatural horrors, leading to a nightmarish descent into a realm of unspeakable terror. I think Lucio Fulci's films are excellent. If you haven't seen any, I recommend a zombie film he made called Zombie 2. It's actually on my top 10 coolest zombie films list. But that movie is quite scary, and so is The Beyond. It's an Italian horror movie, so it's got that kind of rough, violent edge, and it definitely ticks a lot of the boxes on my criteria for cosmic horror. You could even say it's a little bit of a sort of devil intruding on our reality, but it definitely clicks, the sort of descent into madness, the otherworldly parts, all those things. And I think, I saw this when I was a teenager, I think. And I actually saw this before I saw Zombie 2. And I think it probably was the first Italian horror movie I ever saw, so it really shocked me. Later I saw Suspiria, which I think is probably one of the best ones, but at the time this was like, what the hell is this movie? So it definitely belongs in this list at number 9. At number 8 we have The Mist from 2007, directed by Frank Darabont, starring Thomas Jane and Marcia Gay Harden. After a mysterious mist engulfs a small town, trapping a group of people in a local grocery store, they must confront otherworldly creatures lurking within the fog. As the tensions rise and trust breaks down, the survivors face not only the monsters outside, but also the horrors within themselves. I think this movie is very successful, especially for what it could have been. In different hands, I think this could have been a complete disaster. But Frank Darabont is an excellent director, and he gives it the love and attention and tension that it needs to actually work. And he also, I think, strikes the right balance between showing the monsters and keeping it unknown. So, I think that's hard to do. One of the reasons Jaws is so scary is because you very rarely see the shark. And I think that in a lot of movies, they try too much to put it in your face, and I think it works best, if there's mystery. And in this case, there's definitely mystery. I also think the ending is a gut punch and very nihilistic, but it definitely fits all the boxes on this list, I think, all the criteria for my list. And, I think the beauty of it is the similarity to Night of the Living Dead, where the drama comes in not from the enemy, but from the people within the scenario. And there's another film on this list that does a similar thing later, and I think if it's done right, it elevates a movie considerably, because people have darkness inside, and when they're faced with a situation that is beyond anything they're prepared for, often that darkness comes to the forefront. And in this case, that definitely happens. At number 7, we have Jacob's Ladder from 1990, directed by Adrian Lyne, starring Tim Robbins, Elizabeth Pena, and Danny Aiello. A Vietnam War veteran experiences bizarre and nightmarish visions as he struggles to make sense of his fractured reality. Haunted by his past and uncertain about the present, Jacob embarks on a journey to uncover the truth behind the surreal and horrifying events plaguing his life. Okay, so one thing that this movie doesn't do that many of the other ones do on this list is it's not very cosmic. But bear with me a second and I'll explain why it's so good. Now, I think the beauty of this movie is the breakdown of reality. His reality. You don't really know what is going on. You don't know if he's mad or he's, crossed over into this other kind of world. You really just don't know what's going on. So there's a lot of mystery. Now, one of the reasons I put it on here is because I think this is a terrifying movie. And the reason it's so terrifying is that aside, the other movies on this list feel kind of like movies, whereas this one feels like it could actually happen. Like you could actually be experience a break in your reality. And the reason I say that is, you always hear about like acid flashbacks, right? And that's kind of what's going on in this movie. At least it feels that way. But they get more and more intense and scarier as the film goes on. And I'm not going to give away the end, but the end is pretty heartbreaking, and I just think the movie is well done. And part of the reason it's so good is because of Tim Robbins, his performance. He really sells it, and I think he makes it where he's kind of the everyman, and you struggle with him as it goes along. Now, as far as a cosmic element, I think many of the films on this list might miss this or that, and maybe that's what's missing from this movie. But everything else, I think, checks the boxes, basically. At number 6, we have The Lighthouse from 2019, directed by Robert Eggers, starring Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson. In the late 19th century, two lighthouse keepers, Thomas Wake and Ephraim Winslow, grapple with isolation, madness, and supernatural forces as they maintain a remote lighthouse on a desolate New England island. As their sanity unravels, the line between reality and hallucination blurs, leading to a descent into psychological and cosmic horror. Okay, again, with this movie, they say cosmic horror in the description, but in a way it is, but I would almost call it more like mythological horror. However, it does have all the other elements, especially the descent into madness. It's a joy to watch these two excellent actors work off of each other, and as their kind of reality bends, for maybe the first half of the movie, it's kind of bending slowly, but then it just kind of cracks, and there's just all kinds of madness and mayhem going on. I do think this movie really channels the feeling of an H.P. Lovecraft story, and it's just brilliantly done. I also appreciate how much struggle the filmmakers had to endure to do this movie, because it was not an easy shoot. There were storms and all kinds of things, and it just doesn't look like it was very easy. Especially the fact that they're doing this New England accent from that time period. I think it was probably very difficult. So it just shows how great of actors they both are to be able to pull it off. I think it's an excellent film. At number 5, we have Annihilation from 2018, directed by Alex Garland, starring Natalie Portman, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Tessa Thompson. A biologist joins a scientific expedition into a mysterious and expanding phenomenon known as the shimmer. Inside this strange otherworldly environment, the laws of nature seem to be distorted, and the team faces bizarre and dangerous mutations. As she delves deeper, she discovers the true nature of the Shimmer and confronts the personal and existential challenges it presents. I will say this, of all the movies on this list, I think the story in this one is the weakest. However, I think the presentation of the cosmic horror and the existential breakdown, I think, is done brilliantly. I also think it's a very good use of CGI effects as well. And it's quite scary at times, especially the last quarter of the movie. And I think that last quarter makes this a success, because otherwise, if it didn't have that last quarter, I don't know if it would make it on this list, because one of the beautiful things about this movie is as you get to the end, I think this one actually, of all the films on here, really, really sells the idea of a foreign element, sort of an alien element, hitting our deepest fears, the fear of whether the physical can maintain in the presence of something that can twist the physics or the logistics of the physical, which is just, it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, and I think it's done quite well in this film, so you should check it out. At number 4, we have Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956. I also want to mention that the 1978 version is very good as well, but I'm going to focus on the 1956 edition. So the director is Don Siegel, and it stars Kevin McCarthy. A doctor discovers that people are being replaced by emotionless duplicates while they sleep. As he tries to convince others, he becomes entangled in a desperate struggle for survival against an insidious alien invasion. It almost leans the other way into the cosmic horror, to the point where they're actual aliens. But what is great about this film is the paranoia and the kind of, I don't want to say heartbreaking aspect of it, but the feeling, like if you try to put yourself in the shoes of the protagonist in this movie, or the other people as well, when they realize that the people that they love are not the people that they love anymore, even though they look like them and that they act like them, but there's some kind of element missing, that spark of life, and they're kind of like doppelgangers. But I think both versions of this nail the kind of descent into madness and paranoia, and also just the nihilism of who do you turn to, especially once you get so deep into the kind of conspiracy that you don't know who you can trust and who you can't, and eventually it gets to the point where you can't trust anybody. And I think that's a very effective way to create horror, because you kind of put yourself in the shoes of the person, and it would be like completely horrific. And I think it's done well in both of these movies. I do think that the remake is a little bit scarier, but I think the original, the brevity in it and its sort of no-nonsense effectiveness make it more of a classic than the remake, in my opinion. At number 3, we have Alien from 1979, directed by Ridley Scott, starring Sigourney Weaver, Tom Skerritt, and John Hurt. In the distant future, the crew of the spaceship Nostromo responds to a distress signal on an uncharted planet. They discover a derelict alien spacecraft and inadvertently bring back a deadly extraterrestrial organism. As the creature wreaks havoc on the ship, the crew faces a relentless and terrifying battle for survival. Like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the alien here is kind of up front and center, whereas in a lot of the other films on this list, it's not. It's sort of in the background, or kind of an ominous presence that you don't see. In this case, it's right in your face and terrifying, still terrifying. I mean, I watched this movie maybe a year ago, and it really holds up. But the reason I don't have this at number one, because some people probably would put it at number one, there's two reasons. One is the cosmic horror. I think it works well in space, but I think it works better on Earth because in space you almost kind of expect something like that, whereas on Earth, if it invades into our reality, it's much more terrifying. But the other reason I think is because this one falls into a bit of a monster movie. And the number one movie on this list is also kind of a monster movie, but I think it's done in a more disconcerting way as far as body horror and stuff. So we'll get to that in a minute. But as far as Alien, I think all the performances are great. I think the direction is amazing. The creature design is, legendary. Now, on one hand, this is just, like I said, a basic monster movie. So it's kind of like, you have a series of characters and one by one they don't make it. And that's kind of, a stock story in a way. But what actually makes this so great is the thought that was put into the alien and its different forms, let's say. And part of it really plays into the body horror like a lot, obviously. In fact, the one scene is, a classic because of how intense the body horror is in the scene. But the thing that I don't like about this movie, and which is a little bit different than the rest of the movies on this list, is reality doesn't really break down in this. The whole thing is very real. It feels real, even though it's in space and there's an alien. But it feels real. It never feels like there's some kind of elder god force or anything kind of invading it. It's just sort of monster movie. At number two, we have Color Out of Space from 2019, directed by Richard Stanley, starring Nicolas Cage. A meteorite crashes on a family farm, bringing with it a mysterious and otherworldly color that begins to have a profound and disturbing effect on the land, the water, and the family living there. As the environment deteriorates, so does the mental and physical well-being of those exposed to the eerie color. I think this movie is amazing. I'm a big Nick Cage fan, and he definitely delivers here. But what is most interesting to me about this movie is Richard Stanley. When I was a teenager, I saw his movie Hardware, and I thought it was excellent. And he was supposed to direct The Island of Dr. Moreau with Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando, but they kicked him off the movie. And there's a documentary about the making of the movie, and I've seen, his production design notes and things and the pictures and all the kind of background about the movie, and I think his version would have been amazing. Now, what we got was kind of a piece of shit, but the seed is there, the idea is there. The studio couldn't trust him, probably because it was just too big. I think the movie was too big; it would have costed too much money. Similar to what happened with George Lucas on Star Wars, I think. But the difference is he was never removed from the movie. In this case, Richard Stanley was removed from the movie, possibly because he was too ambitious with it. But in Color Out of Space, he nails this movie. I think it is brilliant, and I hope he does more movies. He doesn't have that many in his resume. He's a South African director. But the notable thing about this film is the use of CGI. I think it's one of the best uses of CGI I've ever seen in a movie. To the point where it makes other CGI feel like cartoons, I guess. I also think that he chose to use that for the color, and the application of the color just sells it. And it makes it very eerie because, like some of the other films on this list, it's, an alien presence kind of breaking our reality. And in this case, it is to on many levels, let's say. Um, Physical level, mental level, like psychological level, even spiritual level. And I think that the way that he used the effects, him and his team used the effects to show the color and how it sort of infects everything, I think is brilliant. And the performances are great. As the madness takes over, Nicolas Cage, does Nicolas Cage. And, that's why you get Nicolas Cage for a movie like this, is to do that. And he definitely nails it. And even all the people that play his family, they're all excellent. There's some really horrific scenes with animals and, I don't want to give too much away, but just crazy stuff. And, if this was happening to you in real life, it would be completely terrifying. I could see how someone would lose their mind almost instantly if this actually happened. With a monster, it's a little bit different because it's kind of biological and, it'd still be scary, it'd be terrifying, but I think I can kill a monster. In this case, like, it's a force almost. Like, how do you fight a force? It's crazy. So anyway, it's an awesome movie. At number 1 on my list, I have The Thing from 1982, directed by John Carpenter, starring Kurt Russell, Wilford Brimley, and Keith David. I'd also like to mention that 1951 version, The Thing from Another World, the movie this is remade from, is also excellent. I didn't put it on the list because I didn't think I should put 2 things on the list. So anyway, I chose the John Carpenter one for many reasons, which I'll get into in a second. Here is the synopsis. A research team in Antarctica discovers a parasitic extraterrestrial life form that assimilates and imitates other organisms, leading to intense paranoia and distrust among the crew as they struggle to survive the deadly threat. I would go so far as to say that this is probably maybe the best horror film of all time, not just of cosmic horror, although it does fit into that. I just adore this movie. I watch it every year or two, I think, and it never gets old. It holds up. The effects work in this movie is brilliant. For practical effects, it still is scary and it still is terrifying. And John Carpenter is a master of the horror film, but I think with this movie he kind of elevates it to something else, and part of that has to do with what I've mentioned about other movies on this list, about the paranoia. The paranoia is turned up to 11 in this movie, and you really feel the whole group kind of being torn apart as the alien parasite, let's call it, because that's basically what it is, starts causing mayhem with them. The other great thing about this film is the remote setting. There's no help coming. So that makes it even scarier, I think. And like The Shining, anytime you have a lot of snow and you're in the middle of nowhere, it steps up that isolation and dread, I think. I actually even like the prequel of this movie as well, even though I don't think it's as good. It does have some interesting things, and I do like the way that it kind of connects to this movie. So if you've never seen the prequel with Mary Elizabeth Winstead, you should check that out. I think it holds up. It's not an amazing movie, but it's a good enough movie, I think. But yeah, Kurt Russell is amazing in this. Keith David is amazing in this. It's a perfect film, in my opinion. And I think it is best for this list for several reasons. One reason, it checks the otherworldly box. There's descent into madness, not so much from Kurt Russell. He remains pretty cool throughout the movie, but others start to lose their mind. There is a breaking of reality in the fact that the parasite can change not just its form, but it can sort of assimilate into people, and I think that is terrifying. It is a bit, like I said about Alien, it's kind of like a monster movie, But I think the difference between this and Alien is Alien almost seems more, the threat of it is biological, like it's trying to reproduce, right, and eat. But in this case, its very survival depends on its integration with other life forms, and I just think that is terrifying. It's like a body horror, cosmic horror bomb or something. It's just like, it's like really intense. So yeah, that's why I think this is number one. If you have any that you think should be on this list, or that maybe, I think there are so many cosmic horror films, and there are many that I thought about putting on here, but they just didn't have the impact as some of these. So yeah, if you know of any other ones, maybe lesser known ones, or ones that I completely overlooked, you can let me know in the comments. Or if some of these are your favorites, tell me why they're your favorites. I love this genre. I've always been an H.P. Lovecraft fan, and it's good to see that they're still making films in this genre. Many of the films on this list are from the last 5 years, several of them, not all of them, but a few of them. So it's good to see that they're still making classics now. But anyway, that's all I got for today. Take care. Have a good day.